My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode of Science with Sean. I hope everybody's having a good time. You only got a short work week. Some of you have a 3-4 days. Some of y'all might have a week off. You never know. If you're just coming into into everything, please like the show, share the show. Also, if you're catching a replay, I appreciate you catching a replay. Please like the show and share the show as well. Today we're going to talk about a Texas cohort study with a concentration on deaths. And before we get into that, I want to talk about reporting science. So I'm going to do this until we get a couple of people in the building, and then we're going to go from there. So reporting science. All right. So in 1963, a gentleman by the name of Sir Peter Medawar wrote a provocative essay entitled, "Is the Scientific Paper a Fraud?" He was referring to a scientific communication published in journals. Medawar's use the word fraud refers to misrepresentation of the thought process that led to the work reported. He points out that the results section then written to present facts without any mention of significant interpretation. He says these are saved for the discussion section. Medawar snickers that this is where scientists adopt the ludicrous pretense of asking yourself if the information you have collected actually means anything, and if any general truths are going to emerge from the contemplation of all the evidence you brandished in the sections called results. Here, Medawar is attacking the idea that scientific discovery proceeds by an inductive process by which unbiased observations are made and facts are collected. From these experimental raw materials, generalizations emerge. He concludes that the inductive format of scientific reporting should be discarded because it fails to convey the fact that experimental work begins with an expectation of the outcome. This bias extends to which investigational methods are chosen or discarded, why certain experiments are done and others are not, and why some observations are considered to be relevant while others are not. Many years later, Goodstein's perspective on scientific paper is captured in his description of the noble scientists. He says, every scientific paper is written as if that particular investigation were a triumphant procession from one truth to another. All scientists who perform research, however, know that every scientific experiment is chaotic, like war. You never know what is going on. You cannot usually understand what the data mean, but in the end, you figure out what it was all about, and then, with hindsight, you write it up, describing it as one clear and certain step after the other. This is kind of a hypocrisy, but it is deeply embedded in the way we do science. The research writing and scientific memoirs of Francis Jacob can be compared to aptly illustrate the contrast between actual research and reporting of it. In his biography, Jacob recounts his research with Sidney Brenner and Matthew Melson, which was aimed at the identification and characterization of the X factor, now known as mRNA. Such a factor had been proposed as an intermediary in protein synthesis, despite the absence of chemical basis for it. Jacob and his collaborators pursued this elusive factor, and he writes in his memoirs that they were sure of the correctness of their hypothesis. But their initial work was uniformly unproductive as they attempted to demonstrate the X factor attached to ribosomes. So with their confidence crumbled, Jacob and Brenner retreated to a Pacific Ocean beach where Jacob describes Brenner as suddenly leaping up and shouting, "The magnesium! It's the magnesium!" Jacob and Brenner returned to the lab and repeated experiments again, this time with plenty of magnesium. And indeed, it was the magnesium that enabled them to demonstrate factor X associated with bacterial ribosomes. They had been using too low of a concentration of magnesium, resulting in the disassociation of the mRNA from the ribosomes. So Brenner's critical insight on the beach provided the key to demonstrating the existence of short-lived intermediate that carries the message of the genes and DNA to the ribosomes, where protein synthesis occurs. However, the presentation of these results in a 1961 Nature paper does not portray events as told in Jacob's autobiography. Instead, Brenner's insight is translated into a series of controlled experiments in which ribosomes, their subunits, and the mRNA were dissociated or associated depending on the concentration of this developing caution. Now, but in the end, Jacob eloquently offers his perspective on such behaviors when it compares writing about research to describe a horse race with a snapshot of penning the history of a war using only official press releases. Jacob says, scientific writing transforms and formalizes research. Scientific writing substitutes an orderly train of concepts and experiments for a jumble of disordered efforts. In short, writing a paper is to substitute order for the disorder and agitation that animate life in the laboratory. So what if you decide to dismiss the usual modus operandi of scientific manuscript writing and relate the work exactly as it happened? For openers, you might begin your paper with the words, "This is the story, ... John Beckwith and his colleagues did exactly that in a manuscript in which they believed that describing the torturous history of the project would provide a perspective that would be instructive of a reader. Beckwith relates the reaction to the paper, citing comments of the referees who variously refer negatively to the manuscript of a personal memoir and fairy tale written in the exotic style of a story. Beckwith says that although the stylistic issues may not have been the principal reason the paper was rejected by two journals, the paper ultimately was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Although we hesitant to make a sweeping conclusion from a single experiment, the prospects of this style of writing don't seem strong at present. For the time being, we expect the scientific papers will continue to read like paragons of logic. They'll describe cleverly crafted experimental approaches applied in the most timely and compelling ways. But in the keeping of Goodstein's myth of the noble scientist, scientific papers for the most part will not represent the true chronology of events, of the intricacies of assembling and interpreting facts that have led to the conclusion. We won't expect to read about the wrong turns, dead ends, and broken tubes that may have been crucial to the overall body of work. Scientific papers rarely describe or put into perspective the pure luck and mistakes that were also part of their work being reported. Now, Grinnell says, discussing the writers of Metawad describes the scientific paper's purpose, and in doing so provides us with some closing perspective. Other researchers will expect to be able to verify the data and the conclusions, not the adventures or misadventures that led to them. I think this is pretty critical here when you're talking about this research and you're talking about reporting science, how scientists argue the steps and, the disregard of the steps to come to an actual conclusion. We all know that in order for them to come to an honest conclusion, there have been some steps that were broken, or some walls that they would hit, or just something would come out and deal with that from different areas of study. It's like, for instance, if you own a car and the starter goes out in the car, right? If you're unfamiliar with a starter going out in the car, you wouldn't think to tap the starter. First, you don't even know where it's located, and you really don't know what's going on. But through some type of weird experimentation, someone said, let me just tap on the starter a little bit. Maybe the sound of that will help the thing crank over. So whoever came up with the idea to tap the starter helped advance an issue or cover up an issue, but they helped advance a particular method that actually worked through experimentation. Now, of course, there was bump in the road. You had people probably fixing things on cars that didn't need to be fixed at the time because they didn't properly understand the engine's core and how all these different intricate pieces were instrumental in helping the car run and move forward. However, through experimentation, someone took a broom, a hammer, or some other type of tool and just started banging on the starter. And next thing you know, the car turned on. And now you're driving down the street and your starter act like nothing never happened for the rest of the day, possibly. But then the next cold morning or something like that, you back to tapping on the starter. But science shapes itself up in a ways that many of us will never understand it unless we pay close attention to how the research is actually conducted. And one of the reasons that I brought this out in the discussion, because we're talking about, well, while research and scientific integrity, we're talking about pieces or the heart or the root of how did we get here? Why do we trust science? Where's the integrity in science? Right? Is this something so-called white man science? So those are some of the things. But before we get going, man, I just find it quite interesting. So I wanted to, share that with everybody about the perspective of how certain people look at these sciences and so forth. So, see, we ain't got a lot in the building. I know it's Monday. I don't know. Maybe y'all a bunch of Buccaneers fans, but the Buccaneers are winning 30-10 over the Giants. So only 4 minutes left in the game. Or maybe the NBA is on. I don't know. Maybe people are working or what it may be. I don't know. But let's see if we can get some people in the building. I know who I ain't seeing in the building. And that's quite interesting. They gonna say their notifications didn't pop up. That's what they all say, ain't it? But peace to Jeremy, man, Keenan, Chavis out there. Peace to you, sister. From West Africa, peace to you. And whoever else may be tuned in that has not said anything to anyone in the chat. Peace to you. Remember to pick up your copy of What Sars Cov2 Taught Me. Is someone else live right now? Nah, you good, bro. I don't know. I don't know if anyone else is live. So what up, Ramon? What's good with you, bro? If someone else is live, let me know. Cause I don't know if anyone else is live. I really don't be dealing with that. All right, so okay. Yeah, don't get too crazy with that. So what I want to do right now is I want to roughly touch on some data, and then I want to get into a particular video, and I'm gonna go ahead and play the copyright right now, so I won't get struck up. Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowances made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Boy, that's gonna be commuted to memory in no time, if it already ain't. All right, so Kofi always hit y'all with the "As I learn, we all learn" slogan. But this is coronavirus pandemic COVID-19. This is statistics and research. This is pretty much in the lane of epidemiological work. We can explore our global data set of COVID-19 vaccines here. Download a complete data set of COVID-19 metrics. Get an overview of the pandemic for any country or single page. Explore all the metrics, including cases, death testings, and vaccinations. Of course, like I said, we're going to focus on deaths. So I'm going to click on the death. Now, remember, you know how I rock. If I show you anything on the screen, it should be in the description of the video. All right. I don't want to download this right now, but I'm going to see if I can pull this up. All right, let me blow my screen up a little bit. And I just want people to kind of see what we're dealing with here, because you're going to see this chart in the video. So as you can see right here, from January to November 21st, you can see U.S., Germany, U.K., France, Canada, India, right? We're talking COVID deaths, and these are deaths per million people, right? And as you can see, between November and February, there was a spike and then a huge drop off, right? And this is around the time, especially February, March, really, yeah, February, March, April, May, right? February, March, April, May. These are vaccine periods, but you have vaccines go into effect in many people around here. And then you just see them dipping out and going all crazy here. And then you see small spikes. And remember, this is, kind of worldwide-ish off over a 7-day period. And now you see them cases pretty much sliding in the other direction, which are an uptick coming into these winter months. Everybody's about to see an uptick. I'm saying that now because we went from 90-some thousand cases, then it went down to 85, then it went down to 70, between 70 and 75. And then I think the data said today there was 95,000 new COVID cases, which would mean that it's up 15,000. And still that 90 something, that's a lot. I mean, 70 something, that's a lot of cases. But here we are though, and we know right now the UK is experiencing an uptick. But remember, the focus is on what? Deaths. I only got all of these checked. I could check more, and we can get the rest of the world involved in this particular graph, but we can stay right here. And these are confirmed deaths. So remember, it's by the millions and whatnot. I know people don't like the they rather have it simplistic. So let's take these other people out of the equation. Let's take the UK out, my bad. Now we ain't got no deaths. I'm trying to see who we want to compare it to. Look at this. Burkina Faso, in the land of the Masi. You know, where people was acting like Africans just wasn't having those situations. They was having such a look at that uptick. They have a huge spike right now. Based on that, not I say huge, but not like really gigantic, but that's how they going. But anyway, there you have it with that. So you have that, you can play around with it. You know what I mean? That's going to help you be able to facilitate some of those things. And then you'll be able to learn from there. So again, that's deaths. Of course, you can deal with cases. And just to give y'all some data here, I just want to deal with the U.S. cases. As you can see, onset spiked up, coming into the new year, drop off. This is where the vaccine began working. And then you seen a back to school surge and stuff like that. And then you come down, and we're probably averaging the COVID cases. I want to blame football for that. It's football season, so you have more people in areas where things are being transmitted at higher rates, and people are getting infected. Many people walking around untested. Low crowd tonight, man. Y'all tripping. But anyway, so there's some data right there. Then we got this, of course, coronavirus cases, 250 million, 5 million deaths, 233 million recovered. Look at them numbers worldwide, bro. 400,000 people. It's crazy. There you have it with that. Let's see if we can go countries. The U.S. up here. Look at that. The U.S. is approaching 800,000 COVID deaths. And we've had a successful vaccine for all this time, and we're approaching a statistic like that. All right, I got a 13-page PDF. This PDF is concentrated. What we're concentrating on here is deaths. This is the study, the Texas study. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and get us going, man. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking or anything like that, but let's see what we can learn from the scientists. You know what I'm saying? Let's get this good build on, ladies and gentlemen.
Medcram.com. Medcram COVID-19 update. Fluvoxamine, an inexpensive, widely available, FDA-approved medication for over.
Hold on, y'all. I got us on the wrong.
Medcram.com. Update. As we head into the winter months, we're going to take stock about what's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic, look at a couple of countries, specifically the United States and Russia. But first, let's take a look at the world and let's see what's going on here. Here we have new cases per million, and we can see here that things are starting to be on the rise, whereas deaths per million seem to be leveling off. And sometimes there is a delay between cases and deaths, something to keep an eye on. When we look at testing for COVID-19 per 1,000 people, we can see here that between Russia and the United States, there are around 3 to 4 COVID-19 tests per 1,000 people in both countries. So I think we can compare them in terms of the number of cases. If we look at new cases per million, we can see here in red that the United States is just getting over its Delta wave, and cases were on the way down, but seem to be leveling off here and maybe turning in the other direction. Whereas clearly over the last few months here in Russia, the number of cases have gone up to actually a higher case per million than in the United States. And here, if we look at new deaths per 1 million, we can see here that in the United States, there has been a decline in those deaths. And in Russia, we're seeing that things have never been worse in terms of deaths per million from the pandemic. So our world in data is showing that despite the similar case rate that we see here, a little over 200 cases per million, there is a much higher death rate, almost twice as high in Russia as in the United States. And there could be several reasons for that. There have been new therapeutics that have been introduced. Also, if we look at the proportion of the population fully vaccinated against COVID-19 in those countries, there is a disparity there as well. And in California, the Delta wave that we just recently had was about a third of the peak that we had earlier this year in January in terms of daily new cases. And in terms of daily deaths, it was even smaller than that. And this seems to be the case for most of the states of the union. The daily deaths of the Delta variant was smaller than that of the deaths earlier this year back in January. And many have attributed that to the efficacy of the vaccine at preventing deaths. One notable exception to this rule was Texas, which had a very similar size in the Delta variant that it did earlier this year in December and January. Also notable was the amount of deaths that occurred from the Delta variant just recently in Texas. And the most recent wave that is made up predominantly of the Delta variant seems to be dropping at this time. And as recording here in early November, 61% of the people in the state of Texas have received at least one dose, and 53% of the people in Texas have been fully vaccinated. There's been some new light on just exactly how efficacious the vaccines have become based on a study that's been put out by the Texas Department of State Health Services. On November 8th, 2021, the Texas Department of State Health Services published this report titled COVID-19 Cases and Deaths by Vaccination Status. So this is not a study that is sponsored by the CDC or a study that was sponsored by any pharmaceutical corporation. This is the state of Texas looking internally as to what's going on in their state regarding infections, deaths, and vaccine status. So this was a real world study looking at real world data. And the places that they looked for it was, number one, they looked at electronic laboratory reporting systems, or the ELRS. And this was linked data, so they could find positive Sars Cov2 data, either using PCR or antigen tests. The second bit of data that they found was with the vital records. And this is so that they can confirm death certificates from COVID. Finally, they were also able to tap into the immune registry to see who got vaccinated from any of the 3 authorized vaccines in the United States. And because all of this data was linked, they wanted to know the question of all the people who have died or who have gotten infections, which ones were vaccinated and which ones were not vaccinated. And they started looking at this on January 15, 2021, because that would be the first day that anybody in Texas would be completely vaccinated. And they took that analysis to October 1st, 2021, which is when they had the data from. And as we look at the data, what you'll see is they did 2 types of analysis. They looked at from January all the way through October, and they looked at September to October. And the reason why they wanted to look at September to October was because the Delta variant was predominant during this period, and they wanted to specifically look at this period to see what vaccine efficacy was. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to look at data in terms of infections and what vaccine status had on infections. And we're going to look at deaths to see what kind of effect vaccine status had on deaths. And then we're going to look at it throughout the entire time period in Texas, and also with respect to when there was the Delta variant. And then, of course, we can look at subgroup analyses in terms of age groups, etc. Okay, so let's take a look at the data. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to split the screen, and we're going to look at infections on one side, and we're going to look at deaths on the other side. In terms of the number of PCR positive and antigen positive subjects in the study, there was 1,545,390 infections. That was split out into 3 different groups. There was those that were unvaxxed, and that was 1,314,337. There were those that were partially vaxxed, and that was 184,732. And then there were those that were fully vaxxed, and that was 46,321. In terms of percentages, this was 85% of the total, this was 12% of the total, and this was 3% of the total. Now, if we look at age groups from the 18 to 29-year-old group, that made up the largest bulk, which was 24.3%. So interestingly, this young age group made up the majority of these cases or these infections. The next most plentiful was the 30 to 39 age group, and that made up 19.7%. And then finally, the 50 to 64-year-old group made up 17.7%. Now, if you look at this, the average age of this group was 39 years of age, which is pretty young when you consider that this was a very wide-ranging group. Males made up 47% of these infections, females made up 52%, and the additional 1% was unknown. So let's take a look at the data here in the actual publication. We're looking at cases or infections, and the time period is all the way from January to October 1st, 2021. And you can see here that they have adjusted the case rate by vaccination status at the rate per 100,000 people. And what they found that in the unvaccinated people, there was a 14,196.6 per 100,000 rate of SARS-CoV-2 infections, as opposed to 315.9 per 100,000 people. And that goes to, in terms of the difference, a 45-fold increased risk of coming down with SARS-CoV-2 if you're unvaccinated in Texas from January 15 to October 1st, 2021. Now, what's even more interesting is when you break it down by age, and we're looking from January all the way to October. And what you'll notice here is that there is a considerable difference across all age groups, but notice that in the youngest, 12 to 17-year-old age group, there was the high difference in terms of infections in unvaccinated versus vaccinated. In other words, according to this data, the vaccines were the most effective at reducing infection in the 12 to 17-year-old age group. Now, when we just look at September to October, so we're looking predominantly at the Delta variant at this point, and we look at it, instead of it being 45 times difference, because we know the Delta variant was a little bit more resistant to the vaccines, and by resistance, simply that the vaccine efficacy with respect to preventing infections was lower. And the Delta variant was more likely to cause symptomatic breakthrough infections than the other previous variants that we've seen. Here, it's only 13 times higher in unvaccinated people. And once again, let's take a look at the age groups. And what we see here is that the highest efficacy of the vaccine in terms of reducing infections is once again in the 12 to 17-year-old age group, where it is 22 times different in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And once again, this data comes from the state of Texas. And here's a graph depicting the cases with case rate per 100,000 population on the y-axis, and of course time from January of this year going all the way to the 1st of October here on the right. And the blue line is the case rate per 100,000 population of the unvaccinated in Texas versus the red line here at the bottom, which is the fully vaccinated. So if you notice towards the end there, it was 13 times higher. And even though the blue is considerably above the red there, it's only 13 times higher than the red. Whereas when the amount of infections were relatively low, this blue line was 45 times higher than that red line, which is almost right on the baseline. So what about deaths? Well, they used the vital statistics of the state of Texas to show that the amount of deaths was 28,659. Now, again, we'll split those up to their components and then do the analysis. So for the unvaxxed, there was 24,517. For the partially vaxxed, there was 1,942. And then for the fully vaxxed, there was 2,220. And the percentages here was 85.5% for the unvaxxed, 6.8% for the partially vaxxed, and 7.7% for the fully vaxxed. So the average age was 67 years of age, and that's for all the people that died in this cohort. And if you'll notice that the fully vaxxed was at 7.7% and the partially vaxxed was 6.8%. While there are a lot of confounders that may go into that calculation, it's unclear if those numbers were statistically significantly different. If they had vaccinated the older age group like we know that they did early on and allowed the younger groups to be vaccinated as they went along, it might set up a situation where the fully vaxxed would be much older than the partially vaxxed. Of course, that is purely speculation at this point. Nevertheless, in this cohort, the males represented 58% of the cohort, with females representing 41%. And once again, if you break it down by age, the 75 plus age group represented 35% of the deaths, whereas the 65 to 74-year-old age group was 25.1%. So you can see here clearly that in terms of infections, the younger you are, the more likely you are to become infected, but the older you are, the more likely you are to die. But clearly, it wasn't people greater than 80 that were exclusively dying of COVID-19. 25% of the deaths were in the 65 to 74-year-old age group. And of course, if you add these up, fully 40% of the deaths were in those less than the age of 65. So now we're going to do what we did for the infections and look at the age breakdown for the age-adjusted death rates. And again, we're going back to January 15 to October 1st of 2021. And what we can see here is that there is a 40 times higher rate of death in the unvaccinated cohort versus the vaccinated cohort. And as you can see, the vaccines had their highest efficacy in the 18 to 29-year-old age group, with a 99 times higher rate of death in those that were unvaccinated. And they've listed here less than 10. Because there were so few patients in that group, they did not want to specifically name the number because of privacy concerns. But just realize that there was less than 10 in the number of fully vaccinated COVID-19 associated deaths in the 18 to 29 year group. Whereas those in the unvaccinated was 339. But you can see that across the board, these numbers were significantly high. Now let's look at the death rate from September 4 to October 1st, 2021. And this is going to include more of the Delta variant. And as we expected, the number is high, but it's not as high. It's 20 times higher death rate for those that are not vaccinated in the state of Texas. And when we look at the vaccine efficacy at preventing deaths in September to October, we can see once again that the numbers are high across the board, regardless of age. And once again, the efficacy in the 18 to 29-year-old age group is, in this case, the second highest in the cohort. What about death rate and the graph? Once again, we have the death rate here per 100,000 population on the y-axis, and we have time starting in January on the x-axis. Blue are the unvaccinated, and red are the fully vaccinated, and you can see here graphically what these numbers have been telling us. Now, the last bit of information from this study, it's looking at the behavior of the SARS-CoV-2 virus before the Delta variant was predominant, as it says here in late June, versus after it was predominant, which was in late June. And so if we look at that, is the Delta variant more infectious? Is it more virulent? Is it more likely to put you into the hospital or even cause you to die? And what this study found in the state of Texas was that as opposed to in April of 2021 versus August of 2021, when the Delta variant was much more prevalent, there was a 4 times higher risk of infection after the Delta variant became the predominant strain. So clearly, the Delta variant was more successful at causing infections. However, when we looked at deaths, and there's been some discrepancy here, the question is whether or not the Delta variant is more deadly or not. What they found here was in comparison to April versus August, there was a 5 times higher rate of death associated with the Delta variant. And this seems to lead to other research that has been done that shows credence in the idea that the Delta variant is not only more infectious, but it is more deadly. The other possibility is that, of course, the vaccines are waning in their efficacy, and that could be the reason why we're seeing these shift in numbers. And this article also states the highest proportion of COVID-19 cases and COVID-19 associated deaths were among unvaccinated people compared with those who were fully or partially vaccinated. And here's the important part. Over time, however, as more and more people get vaccinated, the proportion of cases and deaths among vaccinated people is expected to rise. And you can imagine that if the extreme example of 100% of people were vaccinated, you wouldn't see any unvaccinated people in the hospital, even though we know that the vaccine is not 100% effective, and there are always going to be some people, even if it's a few. And so that's the thing that you have to understand. They demonstrate that here. When you look at January 15 to October 1st of 2021, you can see that whereas the fully vaccinated people only made up 3% of the cases and the unvaccinated made up 85% of the cases. However, if you look just towards the end, when more and more people are becoming vaccinated, that 3% jumps to 8.4%, and the 85% drops down to 72% of cases. Same thing is happening with deaths as well. We have 7.7 full.
Remember, just to put this data into perspective, he is referring to Texas, not in the entire United States, Texas. So when he went back to mention, as you can see, this top unvaccinated cases, 1.33 million, right? Let me go back just a little bit. So right here, he shows the number of cases between January to October, 1.3 million number of cases. 85% of the new cases was in unvaccinated, right? Then he says he only shows a short amount of data between September and October, and he shows a different data pool, right? So because you have more people vaccinated, he shows you the number of cases here and here and here, right? And you see this just in that September, October, that month, not even a full month, but a certain amount of days, 3.5 weeks, almost a month. So you go through and you see that that's what he is explaining right there. Remember, this is Texas. This is not everywhere else. So we're looking at a real world cohort study regarding where Chavis is living.
Fully vaccinated going to 13.7% of cases. This doesn't mean that the vaccine necessarily is working less, although that certainly could be the case. What it goes to show is that because more and more of the population is becoming vaccinated, we would expect to see more and more of those being hospitalized to also be vaccinated, even though there wouldn't be a drop in the efficacy of the vaccine. It's just based on population and statistics. And if you're interested to know more about the methods, data sources, definitions, timeframes, linking methods, rate calculations, and limitations of this study, please go to the description below where we will put the link to.
All right, so we just got into that, and that was cool. So now we can go to the link and deal with the data. Let me see how they look. If it's blurry on your cell phone, remember to change your advanced settings to a 70/20, and your cell phone will clear up and work out a little bit better for you. So again, COVID cases and deaths by vaccination status, the Texas Department of State Health Services was published earlier this month. So we have it here. And we deal with the key findings. The key findings from September 4th to October 1st. Unvaccinated people were 13 times more likely to become infected with COVID-19 than fully vaccinated people, right? So again, From September 4th through October 1st, unvaccinated people were 13 times more likely to be infected. Unvaccinated people were 20 times more likely to experience COVID-19 associated death than fully vaccinated people. Yes, unvaccinated people are more likely to die than fully vaccinated people. 20 times. Now, this is the number, right, that we're looking for, that I'm looking for in fully healthy people who have had both doses. You're fully vaccinated, right? And you're healthy. Do you need a booster shot? Because right now they just made it, if you all adults can get the booster. If you work in a public place and you're around people all the time, I would highly recommend that you get a booster shot. If you work from home, you may not want to get one just yet, because there's more data that's going to come out looking at the efficacy and the protection of the vaccine from people who haven't had a booster, who went a whole year with protection. And if they have a case study, anything set up like that, then more than likely I would try to make myself available for that, because I haven't had a booster. And you know what I'm saying? And they're trying to design a vaccine schedule for COVID, and we don't have that yet. So I think it's a little premature for a lot of us to actually get a booster. But in our elderly and those who have pre-existing conditions, I highly recommend booster shots based on the science, and that's what the experts are saying. So I'm following the science and the experts. I would highly recommend those of you who have some type of comorbidities, and get a booster. You in public places, you work on the front line, you booster. You know what I'm saying? You're around people constantly, booster. That's what I would recommend. Now, that's just the first finding. The second finding was vaccinations had a strong protective effect on infections and deaths among people of all ages. If I had the sound effects, right? If I had the sound effects, the clue bomb will get dropped right here. Vaccination had a strong protection effect on infections and deaths among people of all ages. The protective impact on infections was consistent across adult age groups and even greater in people ages 12 to 17. The protective impact of COVID-19 deaths, which was high for all age groups, varied more widely. In September timeframe, unvaccinated people in their 40s were 55 times more likely to die from COVID compared with fully vaccinated people of some age. Now, I was going to put this on Facebook, and I still might do it, but because I want people to think about this. Unvaccinated people in their 40s. Now, unvaccinated. No. Sister out there. Yes, all day long. You know, I'm gonna tell you to get a booster shot all day. You know what I'm saying? My grandmother hadn't gotten her booster shot yet, but we're gonna get her taken care of. But anyway, so unvaccinated people aged 75 years and older were 12 times more likely to die than their vaccinated counterparts. Listen to what the science is saying, ladies and gentlemen. This is not Sean, and I'm not making it up. Based on a cohort study in the state of Texas, Overall, regardless of vaccination status, people in Texas were 4 to 5 times more likely to become infected with COVID or suffer from a COVID associated death while the Delta variant was prevalent in Texas, compared with the period before Delta variant became prevalent. It's more transmissible. People were being infected at higher rates. When I was in Texas, whether Houston or Dallas, people was everywhere. They didn't even respect the virus. People think that they're the most important, and this is a quote from Dr. Cole. Mankind believe that they are the most important organism on this planet. They think that they are the most important organism on this planet. Let that marinate for the listening audience and the people that'll catch the replay. Think about what I just said. That the humans, you, hominids, Homo sapiens sapiens, here in America, you think, in the world probably, think that you're the most important organism on this planet. And you're not. That is why nature is trying to kill you. Did y'all understand what I just said? You're not the most important organism on this planet because nature is trying to kill you. And it has been successful. Now, overall, regardless of vaccination status, people in Texas were 4 to 5 times more likely to become infected with COVID-19 or suffer from COVID-19 associated death. I just had to say that again. Think about that. This was the key findings. All right. We all know this to be true. No vaccine is 100%. We know this. This is a real world state specific data showing. All right. We don't have to go through the objective, but we know it. Or the description. We know it. So we saw the table. This table right here is a representation of COVID case and death rates by vaccination status and age group from January to October. And it shows from January to October, unvaccinated people were 45 times more likely to have an infection with COVID-19 than fully vaccinated people. Unvaccinated people are 45 times more likely to have an infection with COVID-19 than fully vaccinated people. $45. All right, continuing that. There's the data in age groups. Impact. 65 times higher in unvaccinated people when it's dealing with age specific. This is basically arguing that vaccinated people had way more protection than unvaccinated people, and vaccinated people were more likely to be dealt with. So we continue. We saw this chart earlier in the example that I actually used. So the chart that I showed you earlier on, this was actually pulled out to represent that. Then we look at the impact of the case rate by vaccination status in that same time period. The impact is higher in unvaccinated people than vaccinated people. So we've seen everything that he had actually mentioned here. But what I found unique in this particular study, when he got down to this particular category and he says, age-adjusted death rate from January to October was 40 times higher in unvaccinated people than fully vaccinated people. Unvaccinated people, hear me very closely. You're 40 times higher 40 times more likely to die from COVID than me. You might like those odds. You might. Does that look a little bit better on y'all cell phones? Yeah, it's no longer up for debate. But that should look a little bit better on people's cell phones. My bad. Maybe can I zoom in again? Nope, that'll make it too blurry. Trying to make it easy on the eyes. But 40 times more likely to die. And then when it gets down to age groups, it's crazier. If you're of the age of 18 to 29, unvaccinated people are 99 times higher. In 30 to 39, 48. 49 to 40, 40 to 49, 63 times. 45 times between those older than 49. In 75 and older, unvaccinated people are 30 times more likely to die in the unvaccinated group. But if you look at the numbers, right, you just go by the numbers here, you see that unvaccinated people that was just dying, the rate per 100,000 in unvaccinated people is crazy. This whole study was conducted in all actuality, and remember the link to this study is in the description of this particular video. But this study was created, ladies and gentlemen, to answer those questions. Yeah, if they like them odds, they'll crash dummy, absolutely. But I'm just saying, you got people who like those odds. And it's crazy. It's crazy to me. But I just wanted to kind of run through that actual study, you know what I mean, and kind of deal with that. I'm not going to be on here too long. I want to keep this bite size for people who want to, come back and check it out. Remember, the information that will always be hung up in the description of the particular video. I know it's a very light crowd this evening. I kind of picked that up, but I don't know if it's notifications or if somebody else going. But in September, the time frame of unvaccinated people in their 40s were 55 times more likely to die from COVID compared to the fully vaccinated people. But yeah, man, just, if you haven't picked up your copy of What Sars Cov2 Taught Me, I don't know what you're waiting on. What you waiting on? Why you ain't got your copy yet? Man, you don't get that copy? I promise you, the data in the book, the information in the book is something one can learn from, build up on, and expand. I believe that this particular work is a nice contribution to the community and to our people as a whole and others. And that's probably the area where I need to focus on more likely is everybody else, because some of my people don't even care. They don't care. They'd rather be lied to every day. They'd rather be lied to every day. And the book is out. It's been out for a while. I got some good feedback. A brother hit me up today that's not my Facebook friend. He actually got the book, told me he got the book. I'm waiting to hear what he says. Somebody else hit me up about the book and was just jumping up and down about it. Not literally, but they were giving me some positive feedback. Said they liked the way that I wrote the book, the way it reads, how informative it was, and so on and so forth. And so I appreciate that. Appreciate that. If you haven't got your copy, man, what we waiting on? What you waiting on? It's about to be Thanksgiving. You should have already had your copy. You should have already had your copy, been prepared to sit down among your people, your cousins and aunties and uncles, you know, the ones with all that misinformation that you finna sit next to and they finna talk all that craziness and you finna be like, oh, nah, dog. You get that all wrong. And that's what it is. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. Let me make sure I got this on here right. Hey, that's what I thought. So what's up, man? Any questions, comments, concerns? Anyone wanted to see another piece of data or wanted to review it? Review it a certain way. What's up? What y'all got for me? I'll just put my post on Facebook that I said I was gonna do. Nah, nothing. Oh, okay. So it looked like, man, it really ain't even nothing else left to say, man. You know, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. For those of you who did, man, like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. See y'all on the next upload or the next live.